up and teach. I invite you to the book table. I know many of you have been there, but that's one way that they keep their ministry afloat is by selling books. And you support Dr. Sarfati when you buy books by helping him with his income. Also, there's a black box in the foyer that you can give, and if you want to mark your check, you can either write it to Sepulpa Bible Church and then just put a CMI in the line down below in the memo, or you could just write the check to CMI, Creation Ministries International. Either way, I believe will work just fine, okay? So I hope you have your notepad ready if you're a note taker, and we'll learn tonight about robotics, and I'm excited to hear this talk. And this is a real privilege to have Dr. Sarfati here. So let's pray together. Father, we love you and thank you that you love us. We thank you for this evening and this privilege, Lord, to have this brother with us who has spent his life studying as a scientist and studying your creation. And I thank you that he has studied your word very well and special creation and special revelation. And he has also studied natural revelation. And it seems like he's written an article on just about any kind of animal or critter that there is. And I just thank you for his curiosity and his interest and his diligence. And I just pray that you will use him tonight and tomorrow here in a very powerful way to help each one of us and anyone that might be struggling with issues about creation. And I just pray, God, that you would open eyes to your word. And I pray that you help each one of us who are listening tonight to realize that you have told us in your word that you are the creator of all things. And I pray that you help every one of us to trust you on that. And I pray that you use Dr. Jonathan in powerful ways to help in details. I pray also, Lord, for the salvation of every person listening. And I pray, God, that you would open hearts and open eyes to Christ, even as we hear Dr. Jonathan bring scientific information and biblical information tonight and tomorrow as well. Lord, we love you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. One more item before Dr. Jonathan comes up is, if you would like to talk, the way we do our invitation around here is we generally invite you back out the back door down the Sunday school hall to a prayer room where some of us will be gathered. And I think tonight, those of us who would be counseling will just come up here to the stage afterwards. And if you have questions, feel free to come up, and I'm sure you'll be wanting to ask Dr. Sarfati questions afterwards. But some of us will be here as well. If you want to ask about your own salvation or anything like that, we'd be very happy to talk to you this evening, as long as you like to stay. So, all right, Dr. Sarfati, come on, let's welcome him, y'all.
Oh, well, thank you for having me back. It's been a while since I was here last time. I'm glad you put up with me that time, so you're having me back this time. That must be a good thing. Now, in case you've forgotten, I am a real scientist. That's what people say doesn't exist. I mean, you find in the universities and the high schools, all real scientists believe in evolution and reject the biblical creation. Well, I'm one who rejects evolution, accepts biblical creation. And there are plenty of us around. In fact, Creation Ministries, which is my organization, hires more PhD scientists than any other Christian organization that I'm aware of. And it's also important to realize that science itself grew out of a Christian worldview, the idea of a divine lawmaker who's a God of order and has given us dominion over creation. And to have dominion, we've got to find out how it works. I mean, God was free to create any way he pleased, so we have to find out how he did it. That's what science was for. And most of the founders of science were biblical creationists. Very devout. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton wrote more about the Bible than he wrote about science. But you won't learn that in the government schools. And I guess by now you know I'm not from this country. I better give you a geography lesson for my... So this is where I come from. Okay, I also grew up in this country, New Zealand, and now I actually went to this country in 2010. I mean, I collect passports like you collect stamps. I've got 3 passports now, America, Australia, New Zealand. Okay, so, and one reason we moved here is because we have 3 granddaughters, and they're all teenagers now. But of course, when you want to visit granddaughters, much easier to drive a couple of hours than to fly 9,000 miles across the ocean. And here's a little hobby of mine. I was playing chess before. This is what I sometimes would do, is playing from memory. I'm playing here against these 12 guys, and this guy is making my moves for me and telling me what they're doing, because every square has a letter and a number. So like an Excel spreadsheet, 8 by 8. That's how you do it. And I played with good people in my time, and unfortunately he died not that long ago, at age 88, it's a real loss. Another thing, I'm also ethnically Jewish. My name is the Hebrew word for Frenchman, so I can tell Jewish jokes and French jokes and get away with it. Okay, so now one place you can find information for free is our website. Creation.com is our website. If you're note takers, you've got to take this one. It's hard, you'll forget otherwise. And we actually have a newsletter you can sign up at the book table. I'll give you a chance to sign up tomorrow as well. But I think some of you guys might be here because we notified you via this newsletter, because you put your postcode down. We actually will notify you if it's a creation speaker in your area, and we promise not to spam you or to sell or give your address out. And just a few things on the book table. I mean, we're also a faith-funded ministry. You see, we try to keep our prices right down. They're not expensive. You compare my commentary, this one, with most commentaries, about half the price of a normal one of the same size. But it covers Genesis. It's the only commentary that talks about design and living things, for instance, and dinosaurs and global warming and overpopulation mythology. It covers those things, but also how all the doctrines of Christianity had their beginnings in the early chapters of Genesis, and how did the apostles and Jesus understand Genesis. And we have this companion video series, 12-part free study guide. So this is a good thing for Sunday school, for homeschool to have a look at, especially with a free study guide. Now, to get onto this topic, which is one of my favorites, is the issue of design in living things. And it's interesting, you may have heard of Richard Dawkins from England, Darwin's greatest disciple, who is an atheist, and he uses evolution to push his atheistic faith. But in the last dozen years or so, he's claimed to be a cultural Christian because he's realized that having the Christian foundation has kept other things which are far worse. And he's actually been expelled from some of the atheist society because he dares to criticize Islam. You can criticize Christianity all you like, but don't you dare criticize Islam. And he also says there's only two human sexes either. That's a no-no. So interesting, he gets things done, something's right, you know. I mean, he said here that biology is a study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. And of course, I think they have this appearance because that's the reality. They were designed. And the Apostle Paul certainly agrees that the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, so that they're without excuse. So people like Dawkins and Darwin have no excuse for unbelief because the design is so clear. So let's look at design and see how we recognize design, because we might see an aeroplane made in the factory, know it's been designed, but if you didn't see it being made, what would you look for? I suggest that one thing you look for is you have loads of correct components. But you realize an aeroplane is made up totally of non-flying parts. So how do I get back to Australia? Use high-speed rail, as some people claim, want us to replace air travel with high-speed rail. Might be a bit difficult. But the answer is they are organized correctly. So correct components, but also correct organization. And when you have organization, you know there's an organizer behind it. That's real observational science. See, what's the alternative? The alternative is the evolutionary idea. I'll try and summarize evolution. Summarize it by matter plus time plus energy produces organization. That's a quick summary for you. So I'm going to test this idea. I'm going to try and make an aeroplane that way. I've got matter in the form of a junkyard of aeroplane parts. I have a tornado to provide the energy, and you can have as much time as you want. So you're going to get an aeroplane out of this. This picture looks realistic. Maybe not. Okay, what if I told you instead this picture is the tornado hitting the aeroplane and turning it into a junkyard? Is that better? Why? Okay, why? Why? Yeah, okay, why is that? Why does it happen this way? Okay, the answer is there are many more ways of being a junkyard than being an aeroplane. That's it. So when you have time and energy, you go to the more probable state, which is the junkyard. I mean, tell me, parents, do you have to tell your children to mess up their rooms? And the reason is there are many more ways of being messy than being tidy. That's it. See, a very useful principle, that. Now let's now compare this with living creatures, because living creatures are far more complex because they can make copies of themselves, like your children are sort of copies of you. And your body is composed of trillions of cells which continually copy themselves. That's how your body grows and repairs itself. But have you ever seen an aeroplane have a baby jet? Now the Boeing factory can make jet planes, but it doesn't make you a new factory. It's not self-reproducing. But living things are self-copying. So even the simplest living thing is vastly more complex than the most advanced machine that we make. And if you want a few little, some useless information here, I mean, if you've got a 70-pound man, 154 pounds in American units, okay, that man has about 30 trillion human cells and about 40 trillion bacterial cells. Mostly in the large intestine, the colon. I mean, they're good for you. You need them. And you probably have about 400 trillion viruses regulating those bacteria. They regulate each other. So you need certain nutrients you need the bacteria to produce. So it's good. So God designed most of these microorganisms to be beneficial. Most viruses and most bacteria are still beneficial, but the harmful ones tend to have been degenerate forms of good ones. So after the fall, God cursed the creation. Some originally good bacteria became bad ones. And you can actually compare them. The good ones are actually still more complicated. The bad ones are often degenerated quite badly compared to the good ones, which means they have no choice but to become harmful. They can't get their nutrients otherwise except for being a parasite. But yeah, it's interesting. It's called a microbiome inside you. If you've heard of probiotics, that's what the good bacteria. And you have a virome, which is the viruses inside you. So they're good. They are good for you. And as soon as a baby is born, the microbiome starts to form in a large intestine very quickly. Okay, a bit of trivia for you. But let's now, again, look at this question about matter plus time plus energy, see what would happen. This time it's a frog in a blender. And I add the switch on, to the switch, I'm adding energy, electrical energy to rotational kinetic energy. And I'll turn, okay, let's try it. Hang on, why is this sound not working? It was working before we tested it. Yeah. You may as well leave the sound on from now. I mean, don't worry about this one, but I'll need it later, okay? Okay, so what's the result here is a frog smoothie, right? Now, if I left this going for millions of years, will a frog hop out of here again? Now, why not? Again, there are many more ways of being a smoothie than being a frog. Now, if I canned this and sterilized it, it's safe to eat for years. Well, even if it's not canned frog smoothie, it could be canned Georgia peaches or Florida oranges. Same principle. You've got all the components of life here, but if you sterilize and seal it, no germ will grow in there and give you food poisoning. See, food poisoning is caused by harmful bacteria, harmful germs. But if you sterilize and seal it, there's nothing will grow in there. Nothing living will grow in there, and it's safe to eat. The only danger is if the seal got broken and it came in from outside and contaminated. That's the only way you're going to get a problem there. But as long as the seal is intact, you're not going to get any food poisoning from it. Now, the canned food has all the components, all the chemicals, in fact, a lot of machines of life, but no life will ever grow in there. They talk about life coming from non-living chemicals and some sort of primordial soup they talk about, but this has far more chemicals than you'd ever get in a primordial soup, and we know very well that life will never form in there. So this already kicks evolution to the curb, that life is not forming in there. See, evolution says life once came from non-living chemicals. Real science, in fact, it's called the law of biogenesis, says that life will only come from life. And that's never been refuted. In fact, it's very important for surgeons to know this, because at one time surgery would be about as dangerous as what you're trying to cure because of the infection rate. But then Joseph Lister, following Pasteur, realized life comes only from life. So what he did is he had an antiseptic spray to stop the living things getting into the wound. I mean, so how many millions of lives have been saved because of this real science? Now, one interesting thing involves some of the machines we have in living things. Like, for instance, living things use energy, but in the cell, the energy is this stuff here. Now, I'm a chemist, I like these sort of things. You don't have to worry too much about. I'm just going to tell you, though, this is called ATP. It's the energy currency of life. Your body makes about its own weight in ATP every day and consumes it as fast as you're making it. Cyanide kills you by stopping ATP production, and death follows in a few minutes. That's how important this stuff is. You need it. Living things need this, or they're dead. But now we know it's made by the tiniest motor in the universe. And let's see if the sound will work here.
This animated sequence shows the ATP synthase enzyme in operation. The animation is based on an incredible series of scientific discoveries. Only the colors show artistic license. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the energy currency of the cell. ATP is produced by a tiny molecular rotary motor, rotating at up to 7,000 RPM. These are so small that 100,000 would fit side by side in a millimeter. A current of protons drives the motor, unlike man-made electric motors which use electrons. This portion of the enzyme is where adenosine diphosphate is combined with a phosphate ion in the presence of a catalyst to produce ATP, which is then released, making way for the next cycle. A top view of the enzyme shows the sequential operation. Almost every biochemical process in your body requires ATP. Such a nanomachine exhibits all the characteristics of super-intelligent design. ATP is vital for life, and many of these motors were needed before the first living cell could exist. An evolutionary impossibility.
Now consider, how many trillions of cells we have, and each of them has an energy factory called the mitochondria. That's the energy factory of your cell, and they have these motors going. So you've probably got quadrillions of these motors going inside your body. And if they don't go, you're dead, because then ATP wouldn't be produced. But now let's go back to this airplane and think about what would really cause show design is finding the instruction manual to build it. So not just the machines and the organization, but the instruction manual to put it together. And this is exactly what we have with living things. We have not just amazing machines, but we have the instruction manual, the famous DNA molecule, which stands for definitely no accident. Well, actually, deoxyribonucleic acid, what it really stands for, okay? Now, it's an interesting molecule because it actually has 4 different types of chemical letters, and it's the sequence of these chemical letters that provides the information to code for the proteins that make up your body. Basically, what you are, most of it is because of the DNA code you have. Now, this information can be copied from when a cell divides from parents to children. Like, for instance, you didn't get your mother's eyes and father's ears. It was the DNA information, the instructions from your mother's eyes and father's ears that got copied to you when you began life as a fertilized egg. That's the scientific beginning of life, is fertilization. That's not a religious claim. It's a scientific fact. Life begins at fertilization. And that's when the 2 halves of mother's DNA and father's DNA come together and produce a unique new human being. Now, so you've got 4 different types of letters, okay? But you also have, it's an acid. If you're a chemist, you know what acids are. They actually release a proton, a hydrogen ion. So they release something positively charged. That's what an acid is. So it leaves something negatively charged behind, and this negatively charged thing left behind is a force field that protects the DNA from certain types of chemical damage. It's got this repelling force field. Because it's an acid, that's part of a design feature, is that it's an acid. So a lot of different design features of this amazing molecule. Now, it's interesting, even the simplest cell we have today has about 600 kilobytes of information. That's a lot. I mean, we think of the older computers. I mean, what did Bill Gates once say? Oh, who's going to need more than 640K? Yeah, a bit of a joke now, but you get the idea. It's a lot of information. They thought it was amazing. But in fact, there must be incredible data compression going on, because to try to model what happens when this thing divides in two, 128 computers running for 9 to 10 hours to model it, because it generates half a gigabyte of information. So there must be incredible data compression, even in the simplest cell. Now, this is so simple. This could not be the first life. It's a parasite. It's so many things it can't do. It must be a parasite to get certain things it needs. It just can't function on its own. So it therefore couldn't be the first life, because it couldn't exist unless there's more complicated things for it to live on. But just last year, they were talking about this creature they call the last universal common ancestor, or LUCA for short. Supposedly the latest common ancestor of everything else that's alive today. But I mean, I don't believe this thing ever exists. Okay, that's an evolutionary thing. But saying, if you accept evolution to be true, they worked out that the ancestor of all living things would have to be incredibly complicated, about 2.5 megabytes of information is what they estimate. I mean, this is much more complicated than the mycoplasma. It's only 600 kilobytes. This is 2.5 megabytes. And this is supposed to be the first, the common ancestor of everything, okay, including the mitochondria. They say it's encoded 2,600 protein. That's a lot of enzyme. That's a huge amount of things to be coded. This is it's mostly simple life. And so therefore, it just shows that the parasite must be like the harmful bacteria, like mycoplasma, have degenerated from this more complicated thing. Extremophile means it lived in extreme conditions, far too hot for us to survive in today. They realized it must have had certain enzymes and protective things so it could survive in temperatures of boiling water. When you think of most of the time boiling water is good to sterilize, but there's certain creatures that can live in those things because they've got amazing protective things, including the supposedly common ancestor of everything. Had an ecosystem, had an immune system, and they say it lived 4.2 billion years ago. Now, when you consider the evolutionary age of the Earth is 4.5 billion years ago, that means that there's just no time for it to have evolved. There's not enough time, because remember, you think of Carl Sagan and cosmos, but billions and billions of years. You haven't got billions and billions of years. So not enough time for it to evolve from the time Earth started. It's really quite amazing. That's the just no time gap. And when you consider that going from LUCA to plants and animals today would have taken 3 billion years, that's the evolutionary time scale. So LUCA to the plants and animals, 3 billion years, but the gap between non-living chemicals and a living cell is so profound, and it could have happened in 300 million years. It's puzzling. Especially when, according to the same evolutionists, they say that the Earth was being bombarded by asteroids and comets at that time, which would surely sterilize everything. So I mean, the evolutionary ideas, they contradict themselves. You've got some evolutionists say, the Earth's been splattered and sterilized by these bombardments at that time, but then you've got this complicated ecosystem with this complicated cell. Yeah, so that's the real problem there. Now, I want to give you something about what DNA is supposed to be about, because the DNA has information in multiple dimensions, you could say, because the first dimension is just the letter sequence, but it actually is coiled up in 2 and in 3 dimensions, and even a 4th dimension of time. Because that's how our code works. We have to have not just the sequence, but also where it is. You've got a whole lot of DNA, so where do you find it? Like if you've got an eye cell, you want all the eye information to be accessible. You don't need bone information, because it's not going to hope you don't want a bone coming out of your eye socket, but the bone information's still there, but it's turned off and it's buried. So you have the code that actually tells you the positions of where the information is, and also the timing of when that information is available. So it's got a three-dimensional code and the fourth dimension of time. So a four-dimensional genome is what we have. So let's look at one of the different things that it does, is to reproduce.
Based on molecular research, we are now able to see how DNA is actually copied in living cells. You are looking at an assembly line of amazing miniature biochemical machines that are pulling apart the DNA double helix and cranking out a copy of each strand. The DNA to be copied enters the production line from bottom left. The whirling blue molecular machine is called helicase. It spins the DNA as fast as a jet engine as it unwinds the double helix into two strands. One strand is copied continuously and can be seen spooling off to the right. Things are not so simple for the other strand because it must be copied backwards. It is drawn out repeatedly in loops and copied one section at a time. The end result is two new DNA molecules.
We can have production. Reproduction, you need to have these machines to copy the DNA instructions. But here is a sort of chicken and egg problem for you, that the DNA codes for its own copying machines. But you can't copy those instructions unless you already have copying machines. So you see why it's a sort of chicken and egg problem. You know, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the Bible has the answer, doesn't it? Because God created a chicken that laid the egg. Well, actually, God created the galliform created kind, and a chicken's a variety of the original created kind, like a few other things. So God created kinds with amazing capacity to vary. So he created the galliform kind, and the chicken is part of that, okay? Another thing is that the copying machines must be incredibly accurate. In fact, you only have about one letter per copying cycle in the whole genome, the whole thing. It has to be got one letter is all you can really cope with, because what would happen if you had more than one mistake, the next generation of copying machines would be worse, and therefore do a worse job of copying the next generation, which would make an even worse copying machine, which would do an even worse job. So it wouldn't take long before the whole thing would crash. That's called error catastrophe. In fact, there's another word, Eigen's paradox, they call that. And this actually goes to the Bible. So the Bible says that God created everything very good, and the more we look about the cell machine, we see this must be true. You couldn't start off just good and try and work up, because if it's just good and has maybe one or two copying mistakes per generation, it goes downhill and crashes. So it has to start up here. It has to start well nigh perfect. And what we're seeing is, in fact, degeneration from this perfection. That's what we are seeing. We're seeing things go downhill, but we just cannot start with good or mediocre, because it would just crash if it was good or mediocre. So this modern discoveries point to the truth of God's word, that he created everything very good. In fact, by saying 7 times it was good, and 7 being a number of perfection, he's saying that he created everything perfect. And it had to be perfect, otherwise it wouldn't work. Now, when I show you these things, I have to simplify it. There's no way, it's just so complicated. It has to be simplified. Because one thing that is an issue is, to explain it properly, I have to think about you guys who are old enough to remember landlines, telephones instead of the mobile phones. You had landlines with the coils, and how coils get tangled up easily. Well, DNA is a coil. It can get tangled. I'll give you a short video about what the issue is here.
Let's consider what happens as DNA unwinds during replication. As DNA unwinds, it acts like this rope when we pull apart its two strands. As you pull the strands apart, twisting tension builds up in the rest of the coiled portion. It is actually adding one twist to the remaining rope for each twist pulled out of it. At some point, you can't separate the strands anymore. The remaining rope is too tightly twisted. If you relax your tension on the rope, it will twist around itself in a supercoil. It is releasing tension. If you want to keep pulling the rope apart, you have to release the tension periodically, and one way to do this is to cut the rope and splice it back together. This problem has been best characterized in small circular DNAs. There are two methods of dealing with this problem in DNA. One cuts only one strand of the DNA double helix, and the other cuts both strands. Let's look at the first. Topoisomerase I enzymes cut a single strand of the double helix, pass the other strand through the cut, and reseal the break, relaxing the overwound molecule, which now has one fewer twist. Topoisomerase II enzymes do the same thing but with both strands of the double helix. Topoisomerase II cuts both strands of a double-stranded DNA and passes another double strand through the break and then reseals the break. So if a molecule of DNA is supercoiled, topoisomerase II can remove the supercoiling, 2 twists at a time, to yield a relaxed circle.
Even from bacteria, need these detangling enzymes. And they are extremely complicated. But for instance, they have to do at least 3 things. They have to snip, they have to do some maneuvering, and they have to bind it back. So if any one of these steps doesn't work, it's gone. Because you can't do decoding, you can't do replicating unless you fix the detangling, the tangled knots that would go on. So you have to have these machines working constantly. So the thing is, evolution can't produce it because it can't produce a half or 1/3 or 2/3 complete machine. It has to be totally complete, otherwise it might do more damage. Like for instance, if you get an bacterial infection, you might get prescribed fluoroquinolone antibiotics like Cipro. And what Cipro does is stop the final step of binding back the DNA. So it means these machines go through the bacteria and chop the DNA to smithereens and doesn't put it back together again, so the bacteria dies. Or its DNA is chopped to smithereens by this now incomplete detangler because it's not putting the things back together again. Now, when you look at the way antibiotics work, it's interesting. They often target some of the bacterial machines, and just targeting one is all they need to do to kill the germ, which just shows you how all the machines are essential for living things to work. If you can target one of them and that kills the thing, it just shows you the minimum amount of machinery needed for even a so-called simple cell. So that's one of the most important machines we have. And the thing is, it's another chicken and egg problem because to make the DNA has information to store for the topoisomerase. But you can't read that information unless you already have the machines already working to detangle as you're decoding the instructions to build the machine. So all these machines have to be working together all the way at once. Now, going back to DNA, it's interesting. I did say that DNA has some features that make it very stable, more stable than it would otherwise be, but it is a very unstable molecule. It's interesting our DNA is actually a highly reactive molecule, despite some of the machines that protect it. In fact, on a good day, 1 million of the letters in each of your cells gets damaged. You've got 3 billion letters in each of your cells, but each one of them has 1 million of them damaged. That's a lot. It would be a mutated mess if something wasn't done about it. And this is what won the Nobel Prize in 2015, discovering this. And when you look at the Nobel Prize website about it, they said that you got Thomas Lindau. But previously, they believed DNA was very stable, but he realized that DNA broke down so fast, life wouldn't be possible unless God had given us repair machines. Well, I say God, he probably would say evolution, but I say God gave us repair machines to undo the damage that would happen to DNA because of the chemistry involved. And so Dr. Lindau set about trying to find out the repair machines that living things must. He found some repair machines, and the 2 other guys who got the Nobel Prize that found other sorts of repair machines. And we have an enormous number of repair machines to undo the damage that would get done by chemistry to the DNA. And again, living things would not be possible unless you have these repair machines going. And here's one evolutionist who even said that there's so many different repair machines, everything, bacteria to humans have these amazing repair machines, otherwise life would become a mutated mess really quickly. And once again, DNA has the instructions for its own repair machines. But these instructions would be degraded unless repair machines already existed to preserve those instructions. Again, chicken and egg type problems all over the place with living things. And this goes to an age indicator because DNA has been found in dinosaur bones. Quite a lot, I mean, not just a T-Rex, but also a duck-billed dinosaur had some DNA found in the bones. And it clearly had to be from the animal itself. See, what happens, there's a certain probe molecule that lodges in the groove of the helix, and when it does that, it gives off a fluorescent signal, and there's a very definitive test for finding DNA. And that means the DNA had to have the helical formation, the spiral staircase type formation, so this probe could lodge into the groove there and give off a signal. So this isn't dinosaurs. This one's meant to be 68 million years old. That's what they told us. But then people have measured how fast DNA breaks down. And this may have even underestimated how fast it broke down. Let's take this experiment as face value. So -5 Celsius, which is 23 American degrees, it's below freezing, okay? So below freezing, the maximum time before it's completely broken apart is about 6.8 million years. That's the maximum time. Frozen, it would still break apart completely. And yet this dinosaur is meant to be 10 times as old as its maximum survival time. Furthermore, they all tell us that dinosaurs lived in warm climates, tropical climates. So when you raise the temperature, even to a fairly, I wouldn't call 77 Fahrenheit very hot, would you? I mean, it's a fairly pleasant type of temperature. I mean, we get much more than that in Florida. Okay, but then you got only down to 22,000 years before it's completely broken apart. And yet this thing is meant to be 68 million years old, and it has DNA in this fairly intact formation that you can run a test and find intact DNA on it. Well, when I say intact, it means at least about 12 units long, 12 letters long. But it should be only 1 letter long if it's as old as they claim it is. So, and just a little thing, there's another molecule called RNA in your cell. Now some evolutionists believe that life began with an RNA world, but RNA is 100 times less stable than DNA. So if DNA is impossible in some sort of primordial soup for millions of years, because it breaks down, RNA even more so. RNA needs to really store very much below freezing. I mean, liquid nitrogen temperatures if you really want to keep it. That's how unstable it is. So that's why, as living things, we have DNA to store the information as a library. We have the RNA as making some sort of photocopy of one page that you want to do and then decode that. So RNA is for the short-term things. DNA is for the long-term things. But even the DNA needs lots of repair machines to work. Now, I've talked about DNA having a code, and I said the simplest thing has about 600 kilobytes. The supposed ancestor of every living thing had 2.5 megabytes. We have about 3 gigabytes in each of our cells. And in fact, to give you an idea, if you wrote out the information in each of your cells into paper and ink, it would take about 1,000 Bible-sized books to write it all out. That's the information in each of your cells. Mind you, it's only 200 times the size of the IRS tax code. But think about the book. See, the book is written with ink molecules on paper, but the information did not come from the ink. This comes from our video called Evolution's Achilles Heels, and this is one of the illustrations we give. It's no good putting into a chemistry lab and analyzing the ink chemistry or the paper chemistry. It's the wrong, It's a category mistake, they call that, because information is neither matter nor energy. In fact, it often rides on either matter or energy, like it could ride upon the ink. I'm speaking to you, and that means information's riding upon sound waves. And if I was on the phone with you, the information would be riding upon radio waves, okay? So the information can ride on matter or energy, but it doesn't come from the matter or energy. It's a third fundamental quantity, not coming from matter or energy, but riding on matter or energy. Now, in the same way that the information didn't come from the ink molecules, the information in our DNA did not come from the DNA chemistry. It comes from outside the chemistry, in exactly the same way as the information in the book comes from outside the ink molecules. See, you need an author to arrange those molecules into letters and words and sentences and paragraphs. But you also need language, because you can't really understand my book unless you know English. To give you an example, if I give you a gift, you'd be happy, wouldn't you? It's something you get for free. If you were Germans, would you be happy? No, gift in German means poison. Well, I kid you not. In fact, doing creation talks in New Zealand, a German guy came up to me afterwards and confirmed I was totally right in what I said. And he said when he first came to New Zealand, he was appalled by our Christmas customs because he tried to poison our families. So you see why it's important to get the right language. Now, when you think about it, any book with a language points to at least human intelligence, right? But the remarkable thing about DNA is that there are multiple languages on the same set of letters. For at least 4 codes I can think of, on the same set of letters. You may have heard of something called junk DNA, but in fact what they've realized is that the so-called junk DNA is involved with these other languages. And the whole concept of junk DNA is in the junk pile. God did not make junk, okay? The so-called junk DNA is all these other languages. So DNA is more like a book you could read in English and German and backwards and every 10th letter and still get a message every time. Like you think of one language, at least human intelligence, but a book in multiple languages, that's superhuman intelligence. That's what we have in living things, superhuman intelligent design to make these things in multiple languages as we have. And I'll just give you another example of the languages that we have in DNA. This one is the best known one about how DNA it codes for the proteins that make us how we are. So every living thing must have what I'm about to show you.
This animation demonstrates how the digital information encoded within DNA is used to direct protein synthesis. This is a DNA double helix containing the digital code which directs the cell in all aspects of operation. And here we see a protein complex called an RNA polymerase traveling down the DNA strand. As it moves down the strand, it carefully unwinds the DNA, preparing it for transcription. Inside the polymerase, we see a single-stranded copy of the original instructions being assembled as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. A stop code marks the end of the protein specification, at which point this copy, known as a messenger RNA transcript, exits the polymerase and heads towards a 2-part chemical manufacturing machine called the ribosome. While the messenger RNA moves towards the ribosome, transfer RNA molecules attach to specific amino acids in preparation for assembly. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. Using the instructions encoded on the messenger RNA as a template, the transfer RNA molecules align specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids, creating a protein chain. As this chain exits the ribosome, it is met by chaperones which prevent premature folding, while escorting the protein to a barrel-shaped machine called a chaperonin. This machine helps fold the protein into the precise shape required to perform its function. Although it is unclear how the chaperonin achieves this, we do know that accurate folding is essential in order for the protein to accomplish its intended function. Once the protein is complete, it is released into the cytoplasm to do its job.
Living things have to have these machines. All the machines I've shown you are in living things. They can't survive without this amazing machinery. And in fact, just to give you yet another sort of chicken and egg problem here, is that DNA encodes its own decoding machine, but you can't read the DNA unless you have decoding machines, but you can't get the decoding machines without the instructions in the DNA. So a real chicken and egg problem here. But also, as I've shown you, the DNA decoding machines need those detangling motors before, otherwise the DNA gets tangled up in the process of reading it. It needs those replication machines so that the instructions get copied. But it also, most of these machines use ATP, including the detangling machines, including the replicating machines, including the decoding machines use ATP, which is made by those motors. But again, to build the motors, you need the instructions of the DNA, read by decoding machines, and the detangling machines to keep it going, all encoded by DNA. And it needs ATP, made by the machine. So you need the motors, you need ATP to make the motors that make ATP. So what do you call a three-way chicken and egg problem? Maybe grasshopper, egg, and nymph. Some insects have a three-way thing. There's also some insects which have a four-way cycle, but this is a three-way cycle, like egg, nymph, grasshopper. Okay, so and by the way, what I'm showing you here, that's the simple version. Here's the one you'll be tested on tomorrow. Okay, this is the complicated version. So you see, even getting the first living things is quite an amazing accomplishment. And it's interesting. Here's a non-believer, an evolutionist, Paul Davies, he said most of the workings of a cell are best described not in terms of material stuff, hardware, but as information or software. And he asked, how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. So let's see if Richard Dawkins can help us.
Mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome.
I couldn't answer the question. Now, it's interesting, though, this has been quite an important apologetic issue. Like, for instance, natural selection can't explain any of this. You see, natural selection really, they call it differential reproduction. It's not really so much survival of the fittest, but reproduction of the fittest. See, natural selection says this thing is better, is fitter than B because A leaves more offspring, has more surviving offspring. That makes it fitter. So to have natural selection, you must have reproduction. Therefore, natural selection can't explain the first reproducing cell because natural selection requires reproduction before you can even talk about natural selection, okay? It's interesting that for a long time, for decades, the leading atheistic philosopher was Anthony Flew of England. But in the last few years of his life, he became a believer in a creator, a single God. Not a Christian, unfortunately, he became a believer in a single creator. And this sort of stuff I've been talking to you about is what made him change his mind. Because he says, it seems to me that Richard Dawkins overlooks the fact that Darwin himself pointed out that this whole argument began with a being which already possessed reproductive powers. That's the only way you get natural selection is if you already have reproduction. But then he says, this is the creature, the evolution of which a truly comprehensive theory of evolution must give some account. Darwin himself was well aware he had not produced such an account. And he said, now it seems to me the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. And now we can say, try 70 years. Some of the stuff I've shown you was actually even after he wrote. And the more we discover, the more we realize how amazing the design is and how impossible evolution looks. So it seems a good time to stop. I might even give you a chance to ask me a few questions. But it's interesting. Let's see why we do what we do. So Richard Dawkins, again, he said Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. He needs evolution as a crutch for his faith. But what are we supposed to do about it? We're supposed to demolish arguments and every pretension that sets us up against knowledge of God and take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So we're not just an evolution-bashing ministry or a design ministry. We want to be people of Jesus Christ, who is our Creator and Saviour. And one of the best tools we have for this is our Creation magazine that I'll explain a bit. But this has been going for over 47 years now. Over 100 countries around the world. It has been our best witnessing tool. Comes out quarterly. It's a good thing to... Don't pass them around yet, please. I've got to explain what's going on. But it feeds the whole family. And here's a case of a person who was given a magazine and he realized evolution hasn't got a leg to stand on. There must be a creator. Therefore, I must be accountable to him. How can I become right with him? So every magazine presents the gospel. So it is a gospel magazine, but also a faith-building magazine for the whole family, like this lady here, encourages herself, her own faith, but also she can teach her children the truth of creation, because the government schools aren't going to do it. And to witness, and when it comes to witnessing, it's not a question of do we witness to our children, but who is doing the witnessing? Because make no mistake, your kids are being witnessed to. So let it be the right sort of thing. So that's why we have this subscription option today, and these are going to come around on clipboards here. If you get them, please put a 1 year or 2 year subscription, because we don't know what you're subscribing to, and you fill out the details here, name and address. We post it to you, but also email, because we have a free digital subscription, which means you can take it to people around the world. You can give it to 5 different people around the world. They can have their own digital copy. That's a good way of getting gift subscriptions. So go ahead and pass out, guys. Thanks for waiting for me. And when you, we got some gifts as well, because you pay for 1 year, you get the current magazine. I'm talking about English gifts, not German gifts, okay? So you get the current issues on the table here. Now, when you fill it out on the clipboard, please tear it off when you filled it out and give it to the lovely ladies who are helping Karen and Shannon, who are helping at the book table. So don't go away with it, please. Take it to them and then pass the clipboard around to the next one. So don't go away with it after you filled it in, please. But you get the current issue right away. Digital version comes right away. We'll tell you about that. But 2 years is even better, because you get 2 free DVDs, and that's a real Jewish bargain. So you see all the things that come out. In fact, you get something every month. You'll get something, okay? So it's really, really good. You get a lot of different interesting news. That I wrote one about, is evolution really necessary for science? It's quite a handy one. Here's a classic article about how do dating methods work. This is not about how boys meet girls. It's about how old things are. Okay, and various things like how carbon dating is good evidence for a much younger timescale, because you find them in stuff that carbon-14 decays so quickly it should be gone in about 100,000 years at the very most. And yet it's been found in things like diamonds meant to be over 1 billion years old. So I wrote this article called Diamonds, A Creationist's Best Friend. And every magazine has 4 pages for kids too. So I wrote a series on astronomy a little while back. I'm doing a series on the flood. I'm actually doing the kids at the moment. And here's a book for kids that if they like the outer space, well, here's Creation Astronomy for kids, for anyone who likes the stars and the planets. And we have other books this is for younger kids, this pack of discounted books here. We have a dinosaur pack for those who have dinosaurs, who love their dinosaurs, in different age groups. You've got one for very young kids, one for older kids, one for middle school and above. And we even have a dinosaur book for the high school and adults now, much since I was last here, called Titans. Okay, Titans of the earth, sea and air. So most of them are dinosaurs, but you also have the giant flying reptiles, which are not dinosaurs, giant marine reptiles, which are not dinosaurs, but they're quite interesting creatures nonetheless. Of course, this is one of the core. If you're totally new to this area, besides the Creation magazine, I think this is probably a good one to start with, Creation Answers book. And it comes in the starter pack that has my first book, Refuting Evolution, designed for the high school students. And there's a free DVD, another real Jewish bargain for you. And by the way, our DVDs also have, if you buy them, you can actually scan a code and you can stream them if you want to as well. So this includes a streaming option. If you haven't got a DVD player, you can stream it as well. And this one you might like too, Exploring Geology for middle school and above. But I think adults will learn a lot from a book like this, and same with the dinosaur version. And we have this brand new thing called Biblical Geology 101 to try and learn about Earth history using the Bible, and this new hot off the press, this one, same thing with biology. This might be the one which has more of the stuff I've been talking about. Of all the books we have, probably this one. And the other thing is the Evolution's Achilles heel. That's a very good video to show to Sunday school, to high school group, and also comes with a free DVD. That's another one to have. So if you want to, I'll just have a brief chance, maybe 5 minutes for questions. Then you can look at the book. Who wants to ask me a question about what I've been talking about? Anyone got a question? I'm coming back tomorrow for Sunday school. I'm talking about dinosaurs and the flood and the ark and how they fit in, what the Bible has to say about, and how cutting-edge discoveries in dinosaurs provide evidence for both the flood and a young Earth. Okay, that's important. The main service, I'll be talking about why this matters for the gospel, the death and sin, evidence for the flood, also to undo confusion about natural selection. But I'll be doing quite a lot of flood stuff tomorrow, as well as why it matters for the gospel. Yes, ma'am, please. Yes, please.
Where did Darwin get his ideas? I have read something about his father's beliefs. It's 100 years, plus a little bit. 1859. Where did those ideas?
Well, actually, the video, if you subscribe for a 2-year magazine, one of the videos we have, I think it's called Darwin, The Voyage That Shook the World, which goes into where his ideas came from, how they developed, what's wrong with them. That's a good, interesting thing, but it also shows you on-location shots of his house, South America, the Galapagos Island, all the places he went to. We've got on-location things. And in fact, his grandfather, his paternal grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, actually wrote a book on evolution. So basically, his family, he believed everything came from shellfish. So everything comes from shells is his family crest motto. So he had a grandfather who believed in evolution. His father was an unbeliever. But on his mother's side, you have the Unitarians, like the Jehovah's Witnesses next door, very similar to them in belief. They don't believe Jesus is God. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe Jesus is God. They're heretics, okay? But see, Darwin's mother's side came from that, and in fact, Darwin married his first cousin who came from that side. So you have the Unitarians and outright atheists on both sides of his family. And so it didn't come from a vacuum. In fact, there's always the Victorian idea of progress that seemed to fit some of the ideas of Victorian progress. And so it wasn't in a vacuum. And there are certain people like Huxley who was looking for any excuse to try to undermine the church. And sad to say, the Church of England had actually prepared the way itself because they'd already abandoned the biblical timeline. They didn't believe in a global flood. They believed in the millions of years in geology. So you might say that geological evolution led to biological evolution. A very sad case there. And yet there's certain people today who want us to accept the millions of years without the evolution. Well, it doesn't work. It didn't work in Darwin's time. It's not going to work today. And of course, millions of years when you're having death and suffering before sin. That's what I'll talk about in the main service tomorrow. Okay, question? Yeah. Yes, please, go ahead.
I know of someone who was told they have fragile eggs. Is that in the formation of the DNA, or how did that happen?
Okay, the X chromosome is one of your sex chromosomes. Okay, I'm not terribly familiar with fragile, but it's saying that a part of your DNA the X chromosome is apparently fragile. I'm not just sure how so, but the basic thing is if you have X, double XX, you're a female, XY, you're a male, and it looks like there's something wrong with the X part of it. I'm not too familiar, but obviously it's something that happened since the fall. God didn't make Adam or Eve with fragile X. So something has happened, because as I say, DNA is an unstable molecule. Even with the repair machines, things go wrong, and fragile X may be one of those things, but I'm afraid I'm not as familiar with it as I probably should be. Sorry, I might look it up tonight. You've got me curious, but I can't tell you much more. Sorry. Maybe one more question, then you can go ahead.
You touched it a couple times when you was talking about how they found DNA in dinosaurs, and if we're being fed that everything is billions and billions of years old, and then you touched on the time frame a second time, and forgive me if I'm getting a cart before a horse here, but from Genesis 1:1, how old would you say we are?
Well, I think in my I calculate about 61, 78 years or so. That was back then. So maybe the creation date was 4175 BC, thereabouts. And how I do that is you got 6 literal days from creation to Adam and Eve. Okay, there's 6 24-hour days. They have evening and morning and a number, 24-hour days. Then you got Adam lived 130 years, became the father of Seth. I know sometimes father can mean grandfather or ancestor, but it doesn't matter because there's still 130 years between Adam and Seth. It doesn't matter if they're missing people there. The time that's given in Genesis 5, there's no missing time there. So from Genesis 5, the same goes for Genesis 11. Okay, you've got a tight timeline there. And then you go from Abraham to the Exodus, and we've got a fair idea when the Exodus happened, 1450 BC. Then you got the biblical data about time from Exodus to the building of the temple, and then the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar. And we can actually date Nebuchadnezzar with secular dating. Now, there's some leeway in how long were they in Egypt for. Okay, the short or long sojourn. But it means interesting that all those who have looked at the Hebrew text, they all come up with a figure of around 4000 BC. If you have a text alone, and if you have the Greek text, it's about 5,500. I think the Greek text, the Septuagint, is inflated, but they come up with 5,500 years. There's still a lot less than the millions and millions. You can't escape it, but I think the Bible does give you enough information to calculate. At least to an era, say 100 years or so. I'm not going to quibble about if it's 4004 BC, like Usher said. I'm not going to quibble about that, but I will quibble if you say it's 10,000. I can't see how you get 10,000 out of it. Okay. Yes, ma'am, you had a question? Please. I think your Jewish calendar is roughly right. I think there are reasons why it's not quite right. There are various ideas. For instance, if you look at the early history, after Christ came, then you have 40 years later, the Romans destroyed the temple. That was the first Jewish revolt. Then you have a second Jewish revolt under Bar Kokhba, which means son of the star. Basically, he was a counterfeit Messiah. It was a very sad situation because the Jewish Christians at first joined the revolt because they were patriotic Jews, after all. They wanted to help their country. But then you have this rabbi, Akiva, who said, Bar Kokhba is the Messiah. And the Christians, no, Jesus is the Messiah. We can't support that. So they pulled out, and you have the second revolt destroyed, okay? And it seems like that some of these people wanted to try and make the prophecies of the Messiah coincide with the false Messiah, Bar Kokhba, instead of the true Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, so that's why I think it's slightly out there. And unfortunately, after that, of course, the Jewish Christians were regarded as traitors. Well, no, if he hadn't decided the false Messiah, they would have kept on fighting for the Jewish people. Like Messianic Jews in Israel who believe in Jesus, they are patriotic Israel. They fight for the Jewish army there. They fight for the Israeli defense force. While some of the Orthodox Jews don't fight. They've got exemption, but the Hebrew Christians, they fight for the IDF. But they can't fight for a false Messiah. Go ahead, you were going to ask me something more?
I was just going to say I actually served the IDF.
You did?
Yeah, my mom's Jewish.
Oh, well, thank you for your service.
Grew up in Israel.
Oh, nice.
My younger years, my younger life.
Oh, wow. Are you a Sabra then, are you?
No, I was born in the United States.
It's an interesting place. Not very well, I'm afraid. I've got loads of relatives there, but they actually discouraged me from learning how to speak. I learned a bit to try to do my biblical studies on Genesis, but I never learned to speak it, sorry. And they told me it really wasn't much use unless you're in Israel.
This has been the best. This is awesome. Thank you.
Well, yeah, my pleasure. Well, okay, I think a good time to leave while you're still happy, and hopefully, so that's usually the way. So thanks again for your questions, and I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. And so the book table is open.